Leaders of the most influential countries in the world heading to China. The start of the G20 summit now just days away. This is a CCTV America special report. China wants to improve how the world's economy is managed. It wants a greater role in decision-making and agenda setting with its G20 partners. So how will that happen, and how can growth improve lives, not just in China, but around the world? We are taking you inside this year's G20 summit in Hangzhou.
Live from Washington, this is a special edition of CCTV News.
Thanks for joining us for this inside look at the G20. I'm Elaine Reyes in Washington, D.C. My colleague Mike Walter has traveled to Hangzhou for the G20 summit. He joins us now live. Mike, good morning to you. Quite the atmosphere there in Hangzhou.
Elaine, it certainly is. It is just such a beautiful landscape behind me, as you can see right here in our studio. It's gorgeous. This city was called Paradise on Earth by one of the most famed explorers, Marco Polo. Now, he made that observation hundreds of years ago, but it really still fits the bill today. The beauty of this city is about to be center stage as the leaders of the world's G20 gather for the 11th time. It's also the first time China has hosted the G20. The countries attending will represent some 80% of the world's total trade volume. And the decisions these leaders will make will be felt far beyond any one country's borders. Now, the G20 hosted its first leadership summit in 2008 amid the world's financial crash. The theme for this summit can be summarized with just 4 I's: innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive. That means the heads of governments here will be working together to grow the world's economy. The aim is to help developing countries develop and to pull the poor out of poverty. Now, to accomplish that, China wants a better balance in the way the world's financial system is governed. Protectionism will be a big topic here as China and others push for barriers in trade to be lifted. Now, it's not just heads of governments that will be here in Hangzhou. Major businesses from the G20 economies will be here as well to attend what's called their own summit, the B20. Participating in the B20, and here's CCTV's Ming Tian.
The global economy's slowdown has affected almost every country. To revive growth, China's major agency for promoting foreign investment and trade put together a meeting of business leaders from the group of 20 major economies. The organizer of the so-called B20 meeting says policymakers have to clear roadblocks for global trade.
We recommend the government set up transparent guidelines for trade policies, allow agencies to access the process, and help with dispute settlement.
Last month, the China Council for Promotion of International Trade finished a report for the Leaders' Summit. Its president, Jiang Zhengwei, says the report will shed light on issues concerning economic governance.
It's not only concerned with growth, but also the well-being of people around the world. I am confident that the report will be welcomed by all members and become the reference for policymaking.
The Business Circle's policy recommendation has 20 items, such as building high-quality infrastructure, funding small businesses, and developing a digital economy.
We hope the governments would reach consensus and provide a good environment for the flow of capital and goods.
Chinese President Xi Jinping will address the meeting, which a number of political leaders will attend. The need to boost global economy is urgent, and the business community hopes the leaders will not only make promises of growth, but more importantly, to turn them into policy and action. Ming Tian, CCTV, Hangzhou, Zhejiang Province.
So if the B20 is the opening act, then of course the main attraction is the G20 and the Leaders Summit here. And CCTV's Ho Na is joining us here in the studio. I guess we're getting a better idea of what to expect. Bring us up to speed.
Well, Mike, in just less than 1 hour, China's Vice Finance Minister Zhu Guangyao will hold a press conference briefing the media on the highlights and key priorities of this year's G20 summit, including the promotion of global economic growth and global governance. But before that, it's all about the B20, because B20 summit is going to kick off tomorrow, and it is a platform, it is a forum for private sector to provide policy recommendations for the G20 leaders. And we have heard from yesterday's press conference, and this year the B20 summit has gathered over 800 business leaders coming from over 30 countries and 26 international organizations, and they have drafted this policy advice report, which gives 20 recommendations covering 6 areas, namely investment, trade and financing, infrastructure, employment, and anti-corruption. Most importantly, the development for the small and medium-sized enterprises. And when it comes to that, the G20 business leaders have proposed this establishment of this electronic world trade platform, which is essentially a multilateral cross-border trading platform, which will help facilitate the small and medium-sized enterprises to do easy financing and reduce massively the cost of operation and transaction. And I believe this is going to be buzzword in the next coming of days.
You know, it's interesting, whenever you bring these leaders together, everyone has their own agenda, but it seems like the stars are aligned in many respects here. Xi Jinping, the president of China, wants this to go off well. President Obama, it's his last G20 summit. He's thinking about his legacy. It's Ban Ki-moon's last G20 summit. All these people here, and all of them care passionately about the climate. So talk to me about green finance, because that's going to be key here as well, isn't it?
I guess green finance is probably one of the key priorities that China proposed in this year's G20 summit, because for the first time, G20 will issue this report on green finance. But it is actually a concept relatively new to many people. So what exactly is it? I talked to Dr. Ma Jun, who is the chief economist of China's central bank, or the PBOC. He has led this China's promotion for green finance since 2014, and he told me that green finance actually refers to financing of investment activities that delivers environmental benefits, say, be it the reduction of air pollution, water pollution, land contaminations. So it's all about green, being green. So he said, but one of the key challenges for developing green finance here in China and globally is that given the massive demand for green finance, which could be in the range of a multi-trillion dollars per year globally. So the key is to do there is not so much amount of money here in this green finance industry. So he calls for more private capital. He encourages more private capital to come into the industry. Especially, he encourages the promotion to facilitate the cross-border trade of green bonds.
All right.
Back to you, Mike.
Talking about green and dressed in green this morning. Thanks so much. Elaine, the anticipation obviously building ahead of the G20. That 2-day summit begins on Sunday right here in Hangzhou. For now, let's send it back to you in the studio.
All right, thanks, Mike. Well, Hangzhou is not alone getting into the excitement of the G20. Nearby Shanghai is too. Former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd traveled there and even spoke a little Mandarin.
当时没有出生，对不对？
Rudd was in Shanghai for an international financial conference. The emphasis was on global economic cooperation. It is the 13th year for the forum, and Rudd was a special guest. That's because he's seen as one of the founders of the G20. So we took time to talk about the G20 with CCTV's Nathan King on our daily political talk show, The Heat.
Well, on the innovation front, I think the Chinese government has been working for some time to lift its own game in this area. The Chinese, quite rightly, have recognized that this has not been a strength of China's economy in the past, and they've sought to make a quantum leap forward in making the country more driven by scientific innovation and technological development. As a driver of new economic activity, therefore, all eyes will be focused on what Chinese leader Xi Jinping has to say in Hangzhou about new directions for the country on that score. I think the other point to emphasize about China's so-called 4 I's is the last one too, which is inclusive growth. What do we mean by that? I think right across the world we're beginning to see the effect of automation, the introduction of artificial intelligence, whether it's in cars which drive themselves, or whether it's in new technologies on production lines, and also in the services sector, we're beginning to see evidence of industries transforming into jobs-free growth, or growth in industries which has much less labour concentration in the past. this is creating a structural problem for long-term employment. So inclusive growth means how do you bring the rest of the country along with you, rather than leaving them as a group of people who don't benefit from the globalization process. I think, therefore, the inclusive growth component of China's motto for this G20 summit in Hangzhou is an important one.
Now, as former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Up ahead, a look at how this year's summit could impact ties between China and the United States.